Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on Football Talk Podcast. My name is Ozzy, and I'm your host for this evening. A lot of rumors circulating today, as as it has been for the last few weeks. So it's been a very exciting transfer window for Liverpool, and we'll speak about a few rumors that have been inkling today in terms of the social media airwaves, but of course we've got some official news, and that is regarding Hugo Ekitike. Now, in terms of the French striker, we all know that the fee has been agreed. The player is scheduled to fly in for a medical tomorrow. Personal terms agreed. Apparently, he'll be earning between 15 to 16 million euros a year, which is roughly around 250k per week. It's a 6-year contract, so definitely a player that we regard very high in terms of our future plan. So in terms of signing, how excited am I? I've probably mentioned it quite a few times this week, but I'm very excited about the prospect of Ekitike joining Liverpool. I think he's a very interesting profile. And having a think about this yesterday, where we've been linked with a lot of strikers in the last few weeks. So he's not, you know, I feel like he's a sort of his own profile to an extent. You've got other strikers like, let's go through the list. So Osimhen, Gyökeres, Sesko, these strikers, they're pretty much known to be, goal scorers, and there's no disrespect, they're quite limited in terms of their all-round game. Whereas your Julian Alvarez's and Isak's, they're players that are playing at the highest level and have a little bit more about them, in terms of all-round game and all that sort of stuff. So those two targets unfortunately were a bit out of bounds, but maybe Isak, is one that's still a slim possibility. So looking at the market, there wasn't a lot of options out there that could have sort of fit the profile that we wanted. And Arsenal has always wanted a striker that is not just, a traditional number nine, playing on the shoulder. He wants a mobile striker that is able to roam around the pitch and can play in different roles and interchange with the other attackers in the team. So I feel like we've got a very, very interesting player in Ekitike. He is, very tall. Um, might come across as very skinny, but still very strong on and off the ball. Likes to attack the channel. Very good in terms of hold up play. Link up play is definitely, one of his strong assets in my opinion. And he likes to roam, around the pitch. He attacks the channels very well. I think in terms of being a prolific striker, he still needs to improve to be regarded as one of the best strikers in the world, which of course, is a huge benchmark there. But he does have the skill set and the capability to achieve that one day. So for me, I'm excited about this player. I think he will fit into the team very, very well. And funny enough, he made a comment in an interview with ESPN today, which I'm going to share quickly. And let me bring it up for you guys. And it pretty much solidifies, how he sort of sees his game, or what he models his game to. So the player that he actually models his game to is none other than Karim Benzema, and that's a very interesting comparison because for me, Karim Benzema is probably one of my favorite strikers of all time. He's a player that is amazing in terms of a finisher, but what he does off the ball in terms of his pressing, his link up play, his technical ability to find passes. I remember hearing a comparison that he's like a R9 in terms of in front of the goal, but he's got the touch of a Zidane. Like that was the kind of comparison that they made when he was coming through the ranks. Of course, he's not a R9, and in terms of Zidane, I don't think he's a Zidane in that aspect either. But he's his own player, and I feel like he's a mesh of the two, where he's got fantastic technique, and for me, he's definitely received the plaudits that he deserved because playing under, or just alongside Ronaldo, he was always sort of not given that accolade that he deserved. But back to Ekitike, it shows what type of striker, if that's the striker he models himself to, then I feel like we've got someone that is a team player. He's not going to be just a striker. He's going to be more than a striker. He's going to be a team player. He's going to help try and provide assist and link up with the other players in the team. So for me, that's a very, very positive sign there. In terms of this tweet, he says he's an accomplished dribbler and enjoys creating for his teammates. With one scout from the top European clubs telling ESPN he loves playing for others who love playing for him. So for me, that's a sign of a pure team player there and an attacker that will definitely help the team's cause. Probably has something of a Firmino about him, where Firmino was that type of player. He was very unselfish and probably wasn't as prolific as people would want him to have been because he was part of such a formidable front three. But you couldn't argue in terms of his ability, his link-up play, playing that false nine. I feel like he made that position his own to an extent. So maybe we're getting a similar player like Ekitike, probably not like for like in terms of Firmino's skill set, but the style of play is going to be something along those lines. So for me, this is an exciting prospect. You've got a player that can drop deep and play as a false nine in that regards, but can also be, a focal point for the team. So maybe he's a unicorn type of profile. There aren't many strikers in world football like Ekitike. And from what I've heard from other rival fans and content creators, no one's really, made sort of negative points about Ekitike. They all are suggesting that he's a good signing. And I think that is pretty much echoed um, so all over the YouTube or content creation world as well. So for me, I'm very, very excited about the signing of Ekitike and looking forward to seeing him in action. The plan is that he will have his medical tomorrow. He'll sign the contract. And I think he'll probably do the whole photo shoot, the media stuff that players tend to do. And I think then he'll fly over to Japan either on Wednesday or Thursday. We've got a friendly match this Saturday against AC Milan. It's a 12:30 UK time kickoff. I don't know if he'll be in line to participate in that fixture, but we do have a fixture next week on Wednesday against Yokohama. So maybe that's the date that we pin to see Ekitike make his debut for Liverpool. So want to add to the calendar. Um, but I'm very, very excited about the prospect of Ekitike signing. In terms of the transfer fee, fans are always going to have an opinion about what Liverpool are spending right now. Some fans are saying we're ruining football, that sort of stuff. I could not care less. It's the first time Liverpool are making big moves in the transfer window, and long may it continue. So for me, very, very excited about the prospect of seeing Ekitike in a Liverpool shirt. Now, on to the next rumor, or should I say next bit of news is Alexander Isak. Now, we all know that he was left out of the squad over the weekend as Eddie Howe deemed that his head was in the right place and it was best for him to be sent home due to the speculation surrounding his future at the club. And that was a very interesting comment from the manager. If I'm being honest, I feel like he was a bit too transparent in that sort of scenario. You're supposed to play the game. You're supposed to just either, pretend or just cover up for the player. Say, look, he wasn't fit for the game, so we thought, maybe he'll be ready for the next fixture, rather than saying, oh, the speculations affecting him, and we thought it'd be best to send him home. So for me, it's quite clear that Isak is very much unsettled at Newcastle. And it also looks like in the next few days we'll get some clarification or some sort of development within the Isak camp because they've made it very clear that there's something is going to develop. They're working, something behind the scenes. Now, if Newcastle forced him to stay, they will have a player who's frustrated and will probably not be in the right state of mind going into next season. So the big question from Newcastle point of view, should they sell Alexander Isak? It seems to be the case that they don't want to sell him to Liverpool. They don't want to strengthen the Premier League champion. In terms of other options, other suitors, the other team that's probably in the mix right now is Al Hilal, who have shown a strong interest in signing the player. And it was reported a few days ago that they had been given permission to speak to the player. Now, we'll see what happens. His agents, pretty much said that they're close to finalizing the next step for the player. And in regards to Liverpool, is there any opportunity or any chance that we re-enter the conversation and place a bid or an official bid uh, for the striker, or has that ship sailed as we're pretty much, on the verge of signing Hugo Ekitike? For me, I feel like it's very, very unlikely that we're going to go for Isak. He's, of course, a fantastic player, one of my dream signings before the window had opened. But I just feel like with Hugo Ekitike being our sort of prime target to come into the squad, it's very, very unlikely that we'll sign Isak and Ekitike. Now, if it happens, then I'm going to be shameless and rightly so. Our fans should feel jubilant about that prospect, but I just don't feel like it's a reality, unfortunately. And what I can say though, I feel like just because let's say we don't make a move this summer, it doesn't kill the interest, if that makes sense. I know it happened with Zubimendi last summer, but I feel like Isak, because he's such a interesting profile, he's pretty much, the profile mentioning of Hugo Ekitike, that's Isak as well, but he's accomplished now. Whereas Ekitike's got potential. He needs to achieve that next level to be regarded as one of the best forwards in Europe. But I feel like Ekitike's ceiling is a little bit higher because he's got a better all-round game. So for me, it's going to be interesting what we do with Isak. Maybe, we go in for a bid in January or maybe even next summer. I feel like next summer seems like the most, common scenario. So let's see, if there is any possibility of us trying to sign Isak in the future. But it also depends, what happens in this window. Um, my prediction, for some reason, I don't see him staying at Newcastle, and I don't think Liverpool will go in to place another bid. I don't know why, but I feel like he might head towards Saudi. I don't know what it is. I think the prospect of joining Al Hilal and earning, a huge amount of money, I think appeals to the player right now. But also, he's quite young. He's 26, I believe. So if he was to go there for like 2, 3 years, he can still come back and have an impact, you know, for a European team going forward. But let's see what happens. The dream scenario would be, of course, we sign Isak as well. I just feel like it's very, very unlikely. So I'm trying to be, as balanced as possible in my opinion there. Just got a couple of comments on before we move on to the next rumor. Big up to Asa. He says, "Do you think Liverpool will sign Isak?" I don't, unfortunately. I would love for us to sign him. I just don't see it being a realistic option. Financially, we can afford it, so it's not like we don't have the money. We have the funds to sign Ekitike and Alexander Isak. But I feel like if we've signed Ekitike, the next sort of position that we should look to build on is probably the left wing position, as it looks like Luis Diaz could be on the verge of moving to Bayern Munich, which we'll speak about very shortly as well. So, for the balance of the team, we've got the striker now. I feel like we need to find that natural left winger and then, maybe add another centre back, and that's pretty much us done for this transfer window. So, I don't think it will happen, but if it does, what a sensational move it would be from Liverpool. How about Rodrigo? So we'll speak about Rodrigo later in the show. He's definitely a player that the club, I believe, have profiled as a replacement for Diaz. So it'll just depend on the speed of that move being concluded and if Rodrigo is interested in the move. So we'll speak about that in due course. On to the next rumor, and we might as well talk about it now. Luis Diaz. So the current report is suggesting that Bayern Munich are set to submit an important bid to try and convince Liverpool to sell Luis Diaz. The latest bid that happened last week was around 60 million pounds. It's been reported that Liverpool want between 70 to 80 million pounds for Luis Diaz. Now, today, earlier on, there was some breaking news in regards to Luis Diaz, which I'll share with you very quickly. And let's bring it up for you guys right now. So One of the reporters that is very close to the Luis Diaz camp, but of course, Colombian football, that is P Sierra R, so that's his Twitter handle there. He reported today that there's a strong possibility that Bayern Munich will finalize the arrival of Luis Diaz. So that pretty much aligns with the report that Bayern Munich are set to make another bid for the striker, or shall I say for the winger. Um, but the big question is, will Bayern Munich place a bid that meets Liverpool's valuation? Now, if they place a bid of 60 million that got rejected, you would assume that they would be willing to spend upwards of 70 million pounds for Luis Diaz. Now, in terms of euros, um, so let's see how much is that in euros. So in euros, that would be 80 million euros. So that would be 70 million pounds for us. I think that would be the deal that Liverpool would end up accepting, if I'm being honest with you. So I feel like if Bayern Munich placed a bid of around 70 million plus add-ons, I think that would be the deal that gets Luis Diaz away from Liverpool and joining Bayern Munich. So it's been very clear that Luis Diaz has no interest in continuing his future at Liverpool. He seems very clearly frustrated about, not being given a new contract or new terms at the club. And for him, it's probably best to move on to a different club. I thought it was going to be Saudi, to be honest with you, but it looks like Bayern Munich are ready to break the bank and try and get Lucho to Munich. Of course, the injury of Musiala may have, added more urgency to their move there. So let's see what happens. I expect to get some sort of clarification later this week in regards to Diaz to Bayern. If they place a bid and it's still deemed as, you know, unacceptable from a Liverpool point of view, then I think that case is closed. Then I feel like he will probably look for a move to another club, and then Saudi, I think, will be in the mix. I'm surprised they haven't really been involved now, but maybe they've got an indication from the player that he wants to stay in Europe and play for a big team like a Bayern Munich. So we'll see what happens. But I feel like there's a very, very strong possibility that this move will be pretty much confirmed at some point later this week. So let's see, how this transfer develops, and we'll get some clarification in regards to Luis Diaz's future. And the player that I feel like we could be possibly targeting is Rodyrgo. Now, apparently, a price has been set, and Real Madrid would want around 90 million euros, which is roughly 78 million pounds for Rodrygo. So the big question is that the right valuation of the player, and is that something Liverpool can afford? I think so. I think the price range is about right. Maybe I would have said 70 million, but I'm not here to haggle 8 million. So if it's 78 and Liverpool believe that that is the right amount for his signature, then I think the club will definitely pursue the signing. And Rodrigo as a player, I think he would be a good addition to our squad. I think, if he comes in and puts his head down and focuses, he could be the main starter on that left wing position at Liverpool. So for me, he would be a great addition to the team. I think in terms of other players out there, I would prefer Barcola. That's my first choice left winger if Liverpool were in the market for that type of player. Just because I feel like his ceiling is a little bit higher, and I feel like he is more dynamic and he attacks, in behind, which is something Rodrigo doesn't do enough. He can do it, but he's more of a ball to feet type of player. So with Barcola, he's able to take on a fullback and stretch the team and create space in between in behind, sorry, the defense. So for me, that's going to be a useful asset in that regards, but. It's going to be interesting. I feel like there have been a lot of links to Arsenal, PSG, and I think Bayern Munich were linked at one point. But of course, Bayern are going to get Diaz. Arsenal, I doubt they're in the market for another winger as they have just signed Madueke. PSG, they're pretty much quite quite sort of blessed in terms of having a lot of attackers in their squad. unless a Barcola departs, which I very highly doubt, because they will try their best to keep him, you know, on board and try and give him a new contract extension. So looks like Liverpool probably have the path to sign Rodrigo and bring him over to Anfield. So only time will tell. But I think once we get clarification of Luis Diaz's status, don't be surprised if we, make a move for Rodrigo um, in quick succession. So very exciting time. So let's see what happens in regards to Rodrigo. Next player is Darwin Nunes. Now we all know that Napoli were very interested in the attacker. That move failed to materialize, and Napoli have actually gone on to sign another striker. Then we've had interest from Saudi teams. So we've got Al Hilal and Al Nasser. But if Al Hilal are pursuing Isak, then it's probably Al Nasser that is a team that would be in the market to sign Darwin Núñez. They've shown strong interest in acquiring his services, but haven't made an official bid. But today there was some news that Juventus are now preparing an attempt to sign Darwin Núñez. Liverpool are asking for around 65, 75 million pounds. That's the sort of the valuation that we have. Um, but Juventus, they are under the impression that that's a bit too much. So they would like to sign him on loan first and then have a obligation to buy under certain conditions. So it would have to be where the transfer fee is the right valuation. Um, so the big question is, what do Liverpool do in this scenario? Because the Napoli deal fell apart because of our valuation. Napoli weren't willing to exceed over 850 million in terms of the financial offer. So do Liverpool need to reduce the price, or should they stay firm in regards to the valuation of Darwin Nunes? I think they should stay firm, because if you're dropping down the price so quickly, then it doesn't help, in terms of how you negotiate deals, and it kind of gives out the wrong signal to other clubs around Europe and around the world, where, if you reduce the price because, people aren't meeting your valuation, then that would be a negotiation tactic whenever someone wants to try and approach or make an inquiry for an existing local player. So I think in terms of the fee, I think 50 million would be the the minimum that Liverpool would accept. I think if someone was to bid around 50 million, I think they'll reluctantly accept that bid. But the reason why they've got the valuation of 65 to 75 million is because of the interest from Saudi Arabia. They would be willing to spend, above 70, 75 million pounds. So that's why we have to add, or we have to communicate to the world that that is what we're looking for. But I think in reality, if anyone offers around 52 million pound, which is 60 million in euros, I think that would be enough for Liverpool to accept the deal and allow Nunes to have discussions with the interested club. So it's going to be interesting, because if Darwin Nunes doesn't get his move and none of the clubs put in the right offer, there is a possibility that he stays for another year. Now, that's not something I would like to see, if I'm being brutally honest. But, if that happens, it is what it is, I guess, because we haven't signed another striker within us. We've only got one striker in Darwin Nunes. So, if he ends up being a backup to Ekitike, then it's, I guess it's not the worst case scenario, but for me, it's not really what I want to see. I think this is a time for us to part ways with Darwin Nunes, because I feel like he's hit the ceiling in terms of what he can do at Liverpool. So I feel like it's best for his own interest, but also the club, to part ways, and he can go over to a different league and really hit the ground running, because he has the skill set, he has the capability. I just don't think he is at the level that Liverpool need, and I don't think his sort of ability is suited to the physicality and intensity of the Premier League. Despite we call him Captain Chaos whenever he's on the pitch, uh, his chaosness is not aligned with what you see in the Premier League because it is played at a very ferocious speed. And when you're that type of player where you're explosive, you have to be intelligent in terms of how you move. You've got to be a bit more calculated. And I feel like at times he's just someone that runs around and doesn't really have a strategy or a tactical approach in terms of what he's doing and where he's moving around. So because of that, he's not, finding those positions where he can finish any chances that's given to him because, you know, generally whenever he plays for Uruguay or when he's played at previous clubs, he's had more time to pick out the shot, in front of goal. Whereas in the league, you've got to be fantastic when it comes to first time finishing. And that's something I don't think is one of his strengths. So let's see what happens with Darwin Núñez. I think that he will part ways with the club. Just remains to be seen where he ends up. If I was to make a prediction, I don't see it being Juventus. Juventus don't tend to spend a lot of money. If I'm being honest with you, I think it will end up being a move to Saudi again. I said Isak for Al Hilal, and I'm saying Darwin Núñez for Al Nassr. I think that's what we'll probably end up seeing in the coming weeks. So let's see what happens. Be very interesting to see what happens with Darwin Núñez. Just going to go through some of the comments before we move on. Stuart says, "My good London friend, good evening, sir. Thanks for the good job. Appreciate your kind words. Thank you, Stuart, for your comment." Double D says, "It's time for Dan's." I like Dan's because I watched him before he even made the first team performance. I was very impressed, in terms of what he brings to the table. My only concern would be his recent injury record because he's been picking up quite a few injuries recently. And I don't know, I don't feel like he's quite ready for the first team fold. I think the best thing to do with Dan's is to send him out on loan, play at the championship level. I know he went over to Sunderland, but he didn't really get much game time. If they're interested in, re-signing him on loan again because they're in the Premier League now, then that would be, a fantastic move for the player. But I don't feel like it's the right time to have him in the mix because if he's in the squad and we end up selling Darwin Núñez, his second choice to Ekitike, and let's say Ekitike is not available, do we have the confidence to have Dan's, starting against a Man City or an Arsenal? I don't quite, think that's the case. So I think a loan move would do well for him. I think it would be best for his development. And then next season, if he's produced a good account of himself in that loan spell, then I think he can be back in the mix. But let's see. You never know. It's a viable option because I don't know if the club wants to spend too much money to find a sort of Diogo Jota replacement, respectively. So let's see what happens. But I'm a fan of Dan's. I just don't think he's quite ready yet, if I'm being brutally honest. Graham, big up Graham. He says Isak to Liverpool very much on. I hope so. I'll take your word for it. I just don't feel like it's going to happen, unfortunately. But nothing's been ruled out. So we live, in hope that we get some sort of breaking news or we make a sort of some sort of development in regards to our approach for Isak. But let's see. Only time will tell. Uh, Graham Rogers says Nunes would do well with Tranmere Rovers if they're interested. Why not? If they got 50 million, we'll accept that. Kieran says, "Hi Ozzy, I'm a bit late to the show tonight. No problem, Kieran. Be up yourself. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your comment." Double D says, "Sick finisher will only improve with more time." I agree. That's why I feel like a loan move would be the perfect time for him to excel and develop because if he's going into the championship, that league is renowned to be very physical and it of course it's not Premier League level, but it's a great gateway for you to enter the Premier League at some point. So if he goes into that league and starts banging in the goals and he can handle that physical element of the game, then I feel like he's tailor made to have an impact for Liverpool in the Premier League in the following season. So for me, he's a great finisher. I definitely agree with that. I think just in terms of his development, I feel like he needs to play more men's football, and then I think he'll be ready. So such a shame that he got injured for Sunderland, where he went there on loan in January because that would have given him great experience to play, and of course being part of the playoffs as well. That would have been vital experience for him. But Fortunately, it wasn't to be. So let's see what the future holds for Dan's. Now, on to next rumor, and this is something that broke just before I came on live, and that is regarding Federico Chiesa. Let me bring the two up so we can read it together. Um, where are we? There we go. So, the breaking news is that Atalanta will present a proposal of 12 million euros to Liverpool for Federico Chiesa. Now, in pounds, that is around 10 million pounds. So, what is my initial thoughts of this rumor slash speculation? It seems very low. I know that's probably around the fee that we end up paying. We end up paying 10 million plus 2.5 in add-ons. I'm sure we've paid those add-ons because we end up winning the league. So that might have been one of the stipulations. I think it's a bit low. I know they've matched us, so we haven't made a loss technically, but he's still a good player, and I feel like he would excel returning to Serie A. So his valuation should be at least 15, 20 million, in my opinion. So let's see, if Atlanta do present that proposal. I'm just a tad bit concerned, if we do sell Chiesa, because if we sell Nunes, Diaz, and Chiesa, that's three attackers leaving the club. We've got Ekitike, so he would have been the Nunes replacement in this scenario. Would that mean we sign two more attackers, or do we just go ahead and sign one attacker to fulfill two roles? Sorry, I think it might not be where we signed another attacker, but if we sell Chiesa, I feel like that's a bit unnecessary, if I'm being honest, because I feel like Chiesa could be listed as a backup for Ekitike into that striker role, and then you have Gakpo, and then hopefully like a new signing in Rodyrgo, and then you've got throwing verts, and then you've got Sabozlai, and then you've got Salah. And if the club wants to do this, they can still keep Harvey Elliott and have him as a backup for Salah, which, in my opinion, I would like the club to do, but I'm not sure if that will happen. But in terms of Salah's backup, he wouldn't have a direct backup in this scenario. But you've got Frimpong that can play right wing. You can see Sabozlai playing in that role. So we've got other players in the squad that can, fill in the gaps when required. So for me, if we sell Chiesa, then I feel like we have to sign two more attackers. It wouldn't sense to have Ekitike and Rodrigo. I feel like it would have to be another one on top of that. So let's see what happens. I'm not completely pleased or convinced with that offer. I think it's quite low. I feel like it should be increased to at least 15 million pounds, and then Liverpool will talk business. So let's see. I'm sure we'll get a development with Chiesa. Of course, unfortunately, he wasn't selected for the tour to Asia, and with that, that puts his future up in the air. There's reports who suggest that he picked up an injury against Stoke City in the behind closed doors friendly, and that's why he hasn't flown with the squad. You know, I don't know what to make of that. I feel like if he was slightly injured, then he could have still hopped on the plane. But if he's, quite severely injured, then it would have been communicated that, he's picked up a serious injury. That isn't the case. So for me, it could just be where we're saving him because we're expecting him to move in due course. So let's see. If I was to give you my sort of gut feeling, I think he will end up leaving. I want him to stay, but I feel like he might not return to Serie A very soon. So we'll see how this rumor develops. On to the next rumor, and that is Ibu Konate. Pretty much the same clubs involved, the same sort of tone, but there's been a different question presented to Liverpool, as it's been reported that rumours should have asked Liverpool what type of offer might convince them to sell Ibrahim Konate this summer. And apparently, according to the Zone, the chance of Ibrahima Konate leaving Liverpool for Real Madrid this summer is 15%. So the question is, if this inquiry from Real Madrid is true, what should be the asking price from Liverpool? Now, if I'm being brutally honest, I feel like we can still ask for a decent amount of money. I know he's got 1 year left on his contract, but that doesn't mean you go for the bargain offer, or you devalue the player by presenting a low valuation. I feel like Liverpool should go out and say, look, give us 50 million and then you can have him because we bought him for 35. So there's no way that Liverpool are selling him for anything less, despite his current situation where he's got 1 year left in his contract. So for me, adding a premium of 15 million because of what he has produced over the years and what he has in terms of capability wise, 50 million is, I think, a sufficient amount. It's not a, I don't think that's even like a crazy or unrealistic amount. I think that should be enough to convince Real Madrid that okay, fine, you know, if that's your valuation, we'll try and meet you and try and place a bid because they signed Hosen for that same amount of money. So they definitely have some sort of money in the bank to make another bid. If they want him 1 year early, then you got to pay a premium price. So that would be my stance to sell him or to communicate behind the scenes that look, if you bid around 50 million, we'll accept that offer. And I feel like that 50 million can be used to sign other players as well. So, if Kanate was to leave in this scenario, it can't just be Gay. It will have to be another option that Liverpool will need to look into. Speaking of Gay, there has been not real development, but the current report is that Tottenham are in the mix. They're showing interest in signing the Crystal Palace defender, but as it stands, Liverpool still remain strong favourites to sign the Crystal Palace captain. Big question is, will Liverpool sign Gay or will Liverpool move on to find another target? In my personal opinion, I think Liverpool will end up signing Guehi. I think it's just a matter of time that we place that official bid and negotiate a deal. I think our focus is more on sealing the Ekitike deal, which will be wrapped up in the next 24 hours. And then, if the Diaz deal happens this week, then our focus will be there. But maybe in the meantime, we, start inquiring for Gay and then get that deal over the line because according to reports, we've already agreed personal terms. So it's all about just meeting Crystal Palace's valuation, which is very unclear at the minute. I think 40 million should, be enough to acquire his services. I still feel like that's actually a big price considering he's got 1 year left. But, you know, some will say that's contradicting because I just said Konate would be worth 50 million. He's in the same boat in regards to having 1 year left on his contract. The difference is Konate is a better player. So that's why I've added, 10 million on top of Gehi. And I think Gehi's price is a little bit high for 40 because he's English. So you've got the English tax added to it already. He's their captain and he fits the homegrown quota. So I feel like Crystal Palace will use that to their advantage. Say, look, he ticks a lot of your boxes, therefore you have to pay a sufficient amount. So I feel like that's why Palace will probably hold up for that sort of ball mark. So it remains to be seen, when that happens. I think we'll make a bid possibly later this week or next week. I think we'll get a bit more of a development in regards to Gehi joining Liverpool. So expect to hear some sort of developments in the next few days. One player that's been linked to Liverpool that has kind of, come out of nowhere or has been regarded as a new rumor now is, let me bring one on the screen for you, Ilya Zabani. Now, he was very, very close to joining PSG, but that move fell through due to, I think, the financial aspect of the transfer fee. So he's a player, you know, that could be regarded as a replacement for Konate if he decides to leave this summer. But also, let's say Gahey doesn't make the move to Liverpool this summer. Maybe we have to find another target, and that ends up being Zabani. So currently, there are a few clubs interested in the Ukrainian defender. You've got Tottenham, Chelsea, and PSG still interested in acquiring his services. Bournemouth value him at around £60 million. My thoughts on the player, I actually quite like him. Because we were linked to Dean Howson quite a lot last year, I made a bit more of an effort to watch Bournemouth games. And I kid you not, I feel like he was more impressive than Hoyson at times. Hoyson impressed me in terms of what he brought from a ball playing point of view. He very silky on the ball, strong in terms of his area presence. But Zabani was all action. Fantastic player. Covered Zabani, sorry, covered Howson, in difficult situations where he's been, someone's gone past him and he's had to cover for him. Very strong in the tackle, very aggressive. I feel like he'd be a good partner for Van Dijk in our defense. I think he's that kind of level. Let's say, let's paint the picture that Konate does leave, but we sign Gahey as well. Have a trio of Van Dijk, Gahey, and Zabani, and then add Joe Gomez to the mix. That's four solid centre backs. I think all four of them can play alongside each other with a great balance as well. So I would be all on board to sign Zabani as a Konate replacement. Now, if he doesn't move this summer, and then Konate ends up leaving next summer, I think he could still be a target for us next summer, especially if he excels and does well at Bournemouth. I feel like he's definitely someone that could be in the pipeline. And of course, let's not forget Richard Hughes is the sporting director that brought him to Bournemouth as well. So you've already got the connections there. He's got Bournemouth on speed dial. So if you want to sign Zabani, I'm sure we'll make that inquiry very soon. So saw this rumor today, and I got excited by it. I thought, you know what, he would be a great fit for our team. I think he's a very, very talented defender, very young as well. So he's got plenty of time to develop and grow. How old is he? He's 22 years of age. He's so young. So that would be the type of signing that I would like us to go for. Uh, Tottenham, they are trying their best to sign him for around £60 million. So let's see what happens. Before we move on, let's go through some of the comments. Uh, Andrew Wright, big up. Andrew says, so Rodrigo placement for Diaz. Um, that's the notion right now, I guess. Will we get Isak? Uh, well, if we selling Chiesa, Nunes, and Diaz, I don't think so. I want to say yes. You guys know I want to say yes. I just don't feel like having Isak and Ekitike provides that balance in our team, because one will probably have to drop to the bench. And I don't think it'll be fair on Ekitike to be that guy, because he's the one that, I feel like the club are really invested in. That they've found a player that ticks all their boxes, and he's the one I feel like they've got very, very high expectations for. So I don't know if the Isak deal will be done in this summer. Now, in terms of us saying, Chiesa, Diaz, and Nunes, it's going to be interesting, because maybe we end up signing another attacker, because right now, just having Ekitike and then one attacker to cover all three of those positions for me is not sufficient enough. You need to replace them, in terms of numbers. So like for like, so have three signings. So Ekitike could be the Nunes signing on paper. Then you've got Rodyrgo. Let's just mention his name. He's the replacement for Diaz. Chiesa needs to be replaced in the squad, in my opinion, especially if you've got Elliot leaving. If Elliot ends up staying, then I don't think we need another attacker. So that would be the sort of the theme there, where for me, if Chiesa or Elliot leave, then that's going. If both of them leave, then we have to sign another attacker. If one of them stays, then I feel like it would be just a direct replacement for Diaz, and that would be it in terms of us recruiting any more forwards, and then we'll go over to the different department and try and add at least one centre back to the mix. So let's see what happens. But I think Rodrigo is probably the odds-on favorite to replace Diaz if and when, I should probably say, makes his move to Bayern Munich. Um, Kieran said there is definitely a good play in there, and to be honest, I don't think he has been given much game time, so we still haven't seen the best of him. But Chiesa wants to leave, I think, so we should let him go. That is, if that is his sort of stance right now, that he wants to move back to Italy, for footballing reasons, or he wants to go back to Italy so he can sort of improve his chances of being selected for the national team next summer, so he can participate in the World Cup. If that's his kind of forefront thinking, then it is what it is. If that's what he wants to do, then that's fine. If the club are pushing him out the door, then I'll be a bit concerned, because I feel like we might as well utilize him for one more season and then move him on next season. But let's see what happens with Chiesa. I feel like it's very, very much 50-50 right now. But because of, actually, I would have said 50-50 a week ago, but because he's not being included in the Asia tour, I feel like it's more 70-30 now that he's going to leave Liverpool. So we'll see. But the bid needs to be improved. Whoever's going to sign him, we can't sell him for 10 million. For me, it needs to be at least 15, 20 million pounds. That's the range I expect to receive with the sale of Chiesa. Kieran says, I would rather sign Murillo from Forest than Zabani. I rate Zabani though, he's decent. I think Zabani just gives you a better balance because he's right footed, whereas Murillo is left footed, plays on the left side. So therefore, Van Dijk will need to shift over to the right side. So for me, um, I think replacing like for like in terms of position and stylistically, Sabani wouldn't be a bad replacement for Konate. I don't think you're going to find a Konate sort of replacement in terms of like for like ability wise, but for me, I think it'd be a good signing. Whenever I watched him for Bournemouth, especially last season, I was very, very impressed. I found him very, very sort of aggressive in his play, very good in terms of tackling. He's not just, being a thug and just tackling people and breaking people's legs and everything. He was very calculating in his tackling, very strong in the air, very dominant against top strikers in the league. So I feel like he's a very, very good defender. So at 22 years of age, he's got a high ceiling. That's probably why PSG were one of the first clubs to knock on Bournemouth's door and try and get him over the line. So I think they're probably still going to try and sign the player at some point. But if Liverpool can get in there and do it, I think that will make the most sense. Hamza's comment is big up. Hamza says, "Do you think LFC signed Alexander Isak's brother? Does he even have a brother that's a footballer?" I have no idea, to be honest with you. Um, if he's as good as him, why not? We'll get him. But no, I have no idea about his brother. Um, Ozan Kabak says, "Big up Oswald, big up Ozan Kabak. Appreciate your commenting. Thank you so much for tuning in." Uh, Hamza says, "Start, bench, or sell? Musiala, Bellingham, or Verts?" So yeah, I put my Liverpool hat on. So Verts to start, bench Musiala, and we'll sell Bellingham because he rejected us. So, but no, I think I rate Verts very, very highly. Musiala, really like him as a Bellingham. I do rate Bellingham as well. But in this scenario, I think he's the one that I'd probably end up selling. So start Verts, bench Musiala, and Bellingham will have to be sold. Kieran says, yeah, good point about the balance. So it'll be interesting to see, um, you know, where the Barney ends up because if PSG are very serious about signing him, then I feel like they'll end up getting him. Do they need him though? I don't think they do. They've got Marquinhos, who I know is a little bit older. Pacho, I'm not hugely convinced by him. He's a good player, but I'm not hugely convinced by him. So maybe they feel like, he would add the balance, or they see him as a successor to Marquinhos because uh, Marquinhos won't be there for too long, in terms of his age, and he would add the balance in their team because Pacho's left-footed and Zabani's right-footed, so it's a good match there. Um, so yeah, let's see what happens to Bayern. Very interesting to see where he ends up this summer. If he stays at Bournemouth, I truly think he'll be one of our prime targets next summer to replace Konate if he makes the move to Real Madrid, which seems very, very likely, unfortunately. Uh, Hamza with the comment says, "No, I mean you as my Muslim brother." Oh, okay. Do you think we'll sign Isak? I would love to, Hamza, but no, I don't see us signing him, unfortunately. I think because we're signing Ekitike, it just feels like that's the number 9. That's the main striker that we're getting. If we get Isak as well, it'd be, something that was out of this world. But you can't rule it out. And the reason why I say you can't rule it out is because our approach hasn't been rebuffed by Newcastle. Despite what fans will tell you, we never made an official bid, but we made an approach or an inquiry to ask Newcastle, if there any, you know, room for negotiation. Are you willing to sell Isak? And they neither said yes or no. But I think they got the inkling that they were trying to play the long game and string Liverpool along. So Liverpool was smart. They pulled out of the deal and they ended up signing Ekitike. That's what's happened now. So I don't think, it'll be on the cards to sign him. I have a feeling that Isak will end up going over to Saudi because their agent are working behind the scenes. They've actually said out loud that, you'll hear something in the next few days. We're trying to do something for our client. So that sounds like a Saudi move where, they're going to get a big commission out of it. Isak gets a huge bumper deal moving over to the Middle East. For me, that wouldn't be the right move for Isak from a sort of player's point of view because I feel like he's one of the best strikers in the league and in Europe as well. And at 26 years of age, it's a bit too premature to move over to Saudi. I feel like he's got so much to offer. I feel like he's still got his prime years ahead of him. So why not, play at Europe, play at the highest level? And then in the end, if in the next 2, 3 years, if you feel like the time's to move on and think about, the long-term vision of, securing your family's future financially, then you can make that move to Saudi. Right now, I don't know. I wouldn't, advise him if he, if he ever spoke to me. But I feel like he's definitely unsettled at Newcastle. I think the links to Liverpool definitely annoyed him, and because we've moved on and signed a striker, I think that's annoyed him even further. So let's see what happens. I would love for us to sign Isak and Ekitike. I just don't think it's realistic, unfortunately. So we'll see, Hamza. We'll see how it goes. Um, Ozan Kabak says, Ozzy, do you think FSG finally accept the new bid of for Lucho? It depends what it is, Ozan, to be fair, because I haven't seen any sort of price point in terms of what that improved bid is going to be. We all know that they placed a bid last week of around 58, 60 million pounds. I think for Liverpool to even consider it, it has to be around 70 million. I think that is the range that we're looking for. If Bayern Munich place a bid of 70 million plus add-ons, I think that's the deal that gets the move over the line. And I think Lucha will end up being a Bayern Munich player. So let's see what happens. I think we'll get some clarity possibly tomorrow or next couple of days in terms of what that fee will look like, and then we'll have a better idea. If they're haggling and they're like bidding 62, 65 million, I don't think that'll be enough for Liverpool. Also, we have to consider that there's interest from Saudi for him as well. So we have to make sure that that is the one that we can kind of, navigate and try and liaise with the Saudi teams if they're really interested in, because they'll be willing to spend 80 odd million pounds, and we take that deal all day long. So let's see. I think it depends on how much they offer. If it's around 70 million, it doesn't meet the maximum, or I say maximum, but it doesn't meet what we sort of publicly said out loud that, well, to be fair, we haven't publicly said out loud, but as what sources will suggest is that, 80 million is probably the ballpark point that we were willing to accept from clubs because of the Saudi interest, because they were willing to spend that kind of money. I think they were willing to spend 86 because that equals to 100 million euros. So that is kind of the range that Liverpool wanted. Um, so yeah, it will be very interesting to see what the bid is. But I feel like he's definitely going to leave. I don't see him staying at Liverpool this summer onwards. So it'll be Bayern or Saudi. I think those are the two destinations that will be very likely for Diaz. So yeah, let's see what happens. Uh, Kieran says, I think PSG do need another centre back because Beraldo isn't great and could be the successor to Marquinhos. I tell you what, Kieran, you're spot on. Beraldo was terrible in the Club World Cup final against Chelsea. He was shocking. Honestly, he was so poor. So yeah, when you watch his performance, I guess you do need an upgrade. Um, and it'll be interesting. I think they'll probably come back with another bid, especially when you've got Tottenham lurking around trying to make a bid, or they're showing very strong interest in signing the player. So maybe that will give PSG the urgency to return him and make a formal offer. So let's see where Zabani ends up. Hamza says, "Do you think Darwin leaves now?" I think so. I think that's always been the plan for Darwin is to to leave Liverpool. I think because he's been at the club for about 3 years, he's done what he can in terms of on the field. Where I don't feel like he improves, his game further playing for Liverpool right now. So I feel like he's hit his ceiling, and it's probably best for us to part ways and you know for Darwin is for him to move on and you know reignite his career somewhere else where he's beloved and he can play to his maximum capability. But at the same time, maybe we're pricing out some of our players. We've got Harvey Elliott in the mix, who I think we valued him at 50 million. So maybe clubs aren't willing to spend that much. I think 40 million is probably the right valuation for him. Um, and Diaz, we valued him at 80, and I think we'll be able to get probably around 70 for him. So that's what I said earlier on. In terms of us, we can't just reduce the valuation and let the world know. We're going to stick to our guns. And once a club offers a close enough fee to that range, then we'll conduct business and get the deal done. So for me, um, I think Darwin will end up leaving. I'm very, very don't want to say positive because it sounds like I just want to get rid of him, but I'm very positive that that move ends up happening at some point. I'd probably say 90% if I have to give a sort of a ball mark sort of prediction. The reason it's the 10% because maybe, the price is too high. But let me know in the chat, would you be okay with having Darwin Núñez as a backup striker for Ekitike next season? In terms of profile, they're not really the same. I know they're both number nines in terms of, their playing ability or their position. But the stylistically, they're actually quite different. Darwin is more of a finisher. Well, that is his style. He's not the greatest of finishers, but he's a finisher, and he likes to play on the shoulder. Whereas Ekitike likes to drop deep, roam around, play on the channels, and he's more effective on the ball. He's got much better link up play. So if he's not available, then you're not getting a similar profile in Nunes. You're getting a completely different type of striker. And that's why I think it's best for him to move on as well, because you want to have players that have similar traits but can also help the team in other parts as well. So for me, it seems very, very likely that he will leave at some point this summer. Kieran says, I would be so disappointed to see Isak go to Saudi. The best players should be playing at the best club. It would be a sad day for football if that happens, in my opinion. I would be disappointed as well because I don't think it's the right time for him to make that move. He can get that move, when he's approaching the latter stage of his career. For me, he doesn't need to do it now. When he's like 30 plus, then he can think about that Saudi move. But right now, at 26 years of age, playing at his prime level right now, I feel like he's got more to achieve as well. That's why I think, it would be very unwise for him to accept that move. But, the finance, involved in those kind of deals, they change opinions and, if he's being offered a crazy amount of money that is life changing, then you can't really blame him too much. But we'll see what happens for Isak. Ozan Kabak says apparently Atlanta want Fede Chiesa and he's not in the Hong Kong squad either. No, he's not. So he's not been selected for the squad. The report or the rumor is that he picked up an injury against Stoke City in that closed door friendly that took place a couple of days ago. So that's why he's not flown as part of the squad. I don't think that's the case. I think they've held him back because there is interest from other clubs. Atalanta is one of them, and I think they're going to try and conclude a deal in the next coming days or so, which is a shame because I would like Chiesa to stay for another season. I think it makes perfect sense to allow that, but maybe he's just not Arsenal's type of player. Just doesn't want him on board, and therefore he has to move on. So yeah, it's a shame, but that's what it looks like. It could be happening in the next few days. Ozan Kabak says, I would be okay because we might be letting Lucho and Fede go. If that's the case, we'll be short up front. That's why we have to be a bit more, logical as well. If there is no plan to sign another striker, then it might make sense for us to keep Nunes for another season because then I feel like you've got decent cover. He's not like for Ekitike, but still decent enough where he can do a shift and have an impression in the team. if Nunes is happy with that role, that's another big question because he might not want to be a backup striker again. But if he's content with doing that, then you know it could be an option. Me personally, I don't want it to be an option because I've been very frustrated with Darwin Nunes for quite some time now. And I don't feel like he's going to improve any further. Like his worst trait is his finishing, and that's actually what he's known for elsewhere. So for me, yeah, he needs to move on, and I feel like it would just be best for all parties for him to part ways and find a new club. But if we can't sell him, then yeah, we might have to just keep him. Um, the coach would probably prefer Nunes over Chiesa up top anyway, in my opinion. So let's see. Um, it wouldn't be the worst case scenario, but it wouldn't be the best case as well. But we'll get some clarification, I think, at some point in this window. Kieran says, I would prefer to sell Nunes and get a new striker. I have lost faith with him, unfortunately. I would as well, but I feel like because we're signing Ekitike now, to sign a backup striker is a quite a difficult proposal because you have to convince that person that you're going to be number two, and there's no leeway around it. He's going to be number two because Ekitike will be signed as your number one striker. You know, we've paid a huge amount of money for him as well. So if you're, let's throw a name out there. Let's say if you're, I don't even know who we target. You know, we were linked to Mateta, for example, but if he was to join, for example, he probably wouldn't even mind, you know, being in rotation. But then maybe he'd come and say, "Look, I'm a Premier League proven striker. I should be starting." So then you've got a fight between two strikers, which could actually work. Or you can go for an option like a Mikutatse from Leon. You know, he wouldn't cost too much, but he'd be a good cover for Ekitike, in my opinion. So maybe that's the profile we look for to sign as, you know, a replacement. I guess I don't want to say it sounds very disrespectful, but you know, to replace Diego Diogo Jota, you know, in terms of football, in terms within our squad. So that could be something on the cards. But I just have a feeling that the club will want to sell Nunes and then you know have Ekitike replace him in the squad. And then if we sell Diaz, which seems to be a very strong likelihood now, sell Diaz and then find a replacement in like a Rodrigo, for example. And then that's our focus done in terms of the striker. And then we move on and look for new additions for the defense. So that's what I'm picturing. But hopefully I'm wrong. And maybe, you know, that was the original plan. And maybe we're thinking now because we're short in numbers, we will probably have to sign a second striker. I don't expect it to be a high profile striker. It'd be crazy if it was Isak and Ekitike, but we'll see if that is on the cards or on the agenda. I don't think it is. If you're asking for my opinion, but would I love for it to happen? All day long. No doubt about that. So let's see what developments there are in that part of the world. Ozan Kabak says, in any case, there's still several solid weeks for Richard Hughes to do business. Let's see what further business he does. Most definitely. I feel like if we were to sign a second striker, it would have to be a profile where it's not going to be like a big name. It's going to be someone where us avid football fans will be aware of because we've seen him in European football or we've seen him, you know, play at some capacity, like a Mikutatse, you know, someone that we saw playing for Georgia, and I thought he was one of their standout players as well in the Euros. So that kind of profile makes sense because he's not going to break the bank and he'll provide decent cover and a good option off the bench. That would be the right type of profile. Or for me, a Mateta would be a fantastic profile where he's experienced and you know when he comes on, he's a physical presence. He gives us a different dynamic, and he's a Premier League proven striker as well. So that would be the profiles that I'll be looking at to have in support of Ekitike. For me, Ekitike will be the number one striker. That's how I see it going forward. So yeah, let's see. You know what developments there. I'm sure we'll get some further news later on this week. On to the next rumor, and we'll speak about internal affairs now, and that is regarding Owen Beck. So he's been linked with a move away from the club. Earlier on today, apparently Rangers were in negotiation for a 10 million move, but now it's been reported that that deal is off as Rangers were only willing to spend or pay up to £7 million, and Liverpool deemed that offer as unacceptable. I'll be honest with you, I was quite surprised that Rangers were even in the mix to buy a player for 10 million, because that's normally not the price range that they, sign players for. And for a left back as well, that's quite an excessive fee. I'm also hearing that Derby County are interested in signing the player on loan for the rest of the season. So the big question is, what should Liverpool do? Should Liverpool try and find a club that Owen Beck can move over permanently, or should we loan him out one more time, see how he does, and then decide on his future next summer? For me, I think the smart or the wisest thing to do is to send him out on loan, because there is a player there, there's a player with huge potential there. I feel like if he moves over to a championship team like a Derby County, he can play there for another season, and if he does well, there is a strong possibility that he can actually be a backup for a Kirkes next summer. With Robertson entering his final year of the contract, I don't expect us to give him a new contract. So therefore, he will be leaving on a free next season. So we'll need to find a replacement straight away. And if you've got a player that's been playing at a good level in the championship for a couple of seasons and has shown great potential, then why not give him the chance to be the backup for Kirkes? So I feel like that would be the smart thing to do. However, the valuation is 10 million clearly from the club. If anyone comes and bids 10 million, then I think we'll take that all day long. But I think from a footballing point of view, it would make more sense to keep him for another year and see how he does. And if he has a spectacular season, it increases his stock even further. So I think that would be the key. Just like Ben Doak, he went there over on loan to Middlesbrough. He was probably valued at 10, 15 million before he went there. Now he's valued at 20, 25 million. So if they have a great impact, at those clubs, then it definitely helps in terms of their valuation. And he had a fantastic season for Blackburn as well. So he's definitely a player, that appeals to a lot of clubs, has decent potential. And I feel like, he could have a future at the club. Just remains to be seen in terms of what happens this summer. So definitely watch this space, because I think we'll get some clarification with regards to Owen Beck very, very soon. And the final rumor is regarding James McConnell. Now, McConnell is set to sign a new long-term contract with the club, as we clearly rate him very, very highly. But there's also a possibility that he is sent out on loan. I believe he's not part of the Asia tour uh, either, alongside Chiesa. So that might be why he's actually stayed, because we're trying to engineer a loan move for him. And funny enough, Derby County is another team that's interested in his services. So is that a good move, or should the player stay at Liverpool this season? Because I actually consider him as one of our midfield options. I had him at sixth choice, I think, on paper. But I also did say, if there was a loan offer available for him at championship level, it might be worth considering, because he's the type of player that I feel like will gain a lot of valuable experience playing at that level, playing men's football, playing in a league where it's very physical, and I feel like it would definitely help him in terms of the long term. So he's a player that's very talented. I rate him quite highly. I think he's got good passing range, he's got good engines, very intelligent, knows when to pass the ball at the right time. So for me, there's a lot of potential in McConnell. So a long move would make sense, and I think Derby County wouldn't be a bad destination as well. So expect to hear some news maybe this week, actually, because he's been left behind. Maybe there's some negotiation happening in the back. So we'll hear some news, I guess, at some point uh, this this week, I think. And that is it for today. Thank you for everyone's comments. Uh, Let's give everyone a shout. Shout out to Asa, shout out to Stuart, shout out to Double D, shout out to Graham, shout out to Kieran, shout out to Andrew, shout out to Hamza, and shout out to Oz and Kabak. Appreciate your engagement as always, guys. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, in terms of upcoming shows, we'll definitely do a show tomorrow. The topic will be depending on what happens in terms of any breaking news or any breaking rumors that we can discuss together. So definitely a show tomorrow around 10, 11 p.m. UK time, which is normally my sort of time slot. Best thing to do is hit that notification bell so you know what time the live streams will begin. And you can also follow me on my social media accounts for latest updates. So you can follow me at Aussie.ftp on Instagram. And you can also follow me at Aussie_FTP on X/Twitter. Just got a couple of comments here. Aussie come out saying medical tomorrow. Aussie, yep, it's the medical tomorrow. So we should get some sort of official news, or it might be where they do the formality of the medicals and then also do the media work, and then Wednesday is when we present. So Ekitike Wednesday, however they want to phrase it. So yeah, we should be getting some official news in the next 24/48 hours, which is very, very encouraging. And Kieran says, good night, guys. Good luck to Ekitike for his medical tomorrow. Yeah, fingers crossed there's no issues with that and he passes in flying colours and becomes a Liverpool player. So yeah, very exciting prospect for us Liverpool fans. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, stay safe, and I hope to speak with you all very, very soon. Goodbye.